problem with that? Can anybody tell me? Mr. Becker wasn't here, so we'll let you off. Anybody know what's wrong with the hallucination theory?
Not everybody.
Yes. Okay, you can't share a hallucination, okay? One of you may be hallucinating out there, and but that's not going to affect everybody. You don't have mass hallucinations, okay? Just like dreams. One of you may have a dream, but you're not going to all have the same dream, mass dreams, okay? That just really doesn't work. Plus, he was seen, they had people ate with him, they touched him, so you can't do that if you're having a hallucination or seeing a ghost or something. You can't touch them and eat with them and watch them eat, so that really is impossible. 500 eyewitnesses, so we can't have that. That's a ridiculous theory, hallucination theory. The other one is the witnesses went to the wrong tomb, okay? So this is, if the disciples all suddenly forgot which tomb he was buried in, did the Jews forget what tomb he was in? Okay, what would they simply do? Go get the body and parade it and say, he's not risen, he's right here. Here's his body. You guys went to the wrong tomb. So everybody would have to have collective amnesia about what they'd done with the body. So that really doesn't seem possible. The other one, and I've heard this many years ago, was the swoon or apparent death theory. So basically they're saying he passed out. The Romans didn't know what they were doing. He didn't really die. And then the coldness of the tomb, and he came back to life. What are some of the problems with that theory? Yeah, he's wrapped up with 75 pounds of burial cloth. That's one, yep. The Romans were experts in killing people, okay? They knew what they were doing. If that's their one job at the crucifixion is to what? Make sure they're dead. It's going to be your life if you let somebody go and they're alive and they wake up. They put a spear through his side and they believe that it hit his lung and his heart. Okay, that was the whole purpose, to really make sure they're dead. I know sometimes there are some cases where people wake up in the morgue, right? But that's just one person missing it and thinking the person's dead. Maybe they have a low heartbeat. But you guys have been suffering up there, and then you put a spear through. I mean, most people go in the morgue, they don't stab them, through their side and their heart and lung to make sure they're dead, right? Okay? So, and even if he was out, then them wrapping him and embalming him, they would have realized he's still alive, right? He would have woken up, and there's no way. So it really doesn't make sense. And then if he came out of the tomb, what would he would have beaten and bloodied and just a wreck, okay? They wouldn't if he walked out. And then what else is wrong with that? He has to what? Get out of the tomb, right? So even if he's in a weakened state, he's been 3 days lying there bleeding, okay? To move the rock, and then for the Romans not to realize he's moving the rock, okay? All right, that would be impossible to move the rock, and then if he could do that, they didn't notice. Okay, and say, oh, he's not dead. Okay, now he's dead. That would have been a very simple thing to do. So that really doesn't make sense. If he appeared to the disciples, they say, you don't look like the risen Christ. You look like you need to go to the hospital. Something happened. So that is a big theory that I've heard for many years. But it really just has so many flaws in that. So the next one we're going to look at is that the disciples stole the body. This theory takes the untenable position that the New Testament writers were all liars. For some inexplicable reason, they stole the body in order to get themselves beaten, tortured, and martyred. And I want to play that clip. Did anybody see that clip I had? It's a Babylon Bee. You can look it up. And they're like, I got this idea. Let's steal the body of Jesus. They're like, yay! And they're like, and then what's going to happen? We're going to have fame, fortune. And they're like, no, you're going to get beaten, tortured, and death. They're like, yay! And it's just, that's how ridiculous that they would all have to go along with this crazy plan. And nobody does that for a lie. Nobody is willing to die for a lie, something they know isn't true. And it's hard nobody makes up a lie so they can get tortured and killed. Nobody does that. So why would they embark on such a self-defeating conspiracy? Why did everyone continue to say that Jesus had risen from the dead when they could have saved themselves by recanting that testimony, okay? even if for some reason they thought they were going to get fame, power, after the first few disciples start getting killed, martyred, you'd say, well, I'm going to recant, I'm done spreading this. I know it's a lie, they're dying, I'm going to be next. Why would they keep dying for this lie that's just getting them killed? In addition to the disciples' severe conflict of interest, adherents of this theory cannot explain other absurdities required by this theory. For example, how did the Romans even steal the body? How did they get by the Roman guards, trained to guard with their lives? So these are trained elite soldiers. Okay, they know how, the Romans know how big of a deal this is. You think they're going to put their worst 2 soldiers to guard this? They don't want strife, they don't want problems, they don't want a revolt or uprising. Okay, they're going to put 2 soldiers. The soldiers know if they don't do their job, their guard duty, they fall asleep, what's going to happen? Death. Okay, they know that. And even if they both fell asleep, how do you move a big rock and nobody knows? I mean, that just, I said this before, I can barely open the door without waking my wife up to go in the bedroom when she's asleep, She's not happy when I do that, but I mean, if just opening it and you're like shutting it as, so we're talking about moving a rock here, not waking anybody up. So even if they pulled that off, for what ends? To go and tell a lie and with conviction? Like, hey, he really wrote. No, he really didn't. But hey, he wrote, and hey, we're excited, every time they're together, they know this is a huge lie. Not only they're going to die, but what are they spreading this, and other people are dying, right? The Roman government is persecuting Christians and putting them to the lions and just, setting them as human torches, doing terrible things. So I'm going to die, but I'm spreading this, so converting you so you might die. I mean, how evil would you have to be to do that? We mentioned people will die for something they think is the truth, right? Okay, terrorists, they think they got the truth, but okay, these people, they don't know. They weren't there, but these people would have actively known it was a lie. How would as we have seen, the notion the disciples stole the body is exactly the explanation the Jews offered to explain the empty tomb. Beyond the fact that the disciples had no motive or ability to steal the body, this ancient Jewish explanation was not good for 2 other reasons. How would the sleeping Roman guards have known it was the disciples who stole the body? Okay, they woke up. How do they know who stole it? Okay, I guess they made an assumption. But no Roman guard would admit the capital crime of sleeping on the job. They wouldn't go and say, hey, the body's missing, I fell asleep. Okay, that's a death sentence. Who would admit that? And that's why, perhaps as Matthew records, the Jewish authorities had to pay off the guards and promise to keep them out of trouble with the governor. Okay, so the whole story does not add up, and that's one of the few first century possible explanations, and it does not add up. So it's a theory that the disciples stole the body. Next one is a substitute took Jesus' place on the cross. You say, that's weird. Well, this happens to be the official explanation offered by many Muslims today. They say that Jesus was not crucified, but someone like Judas was killed in his place. The Quran claims of Jesus, this is what they said, they killed him not, nor crucified him, but so it was made to appear to them, and those who differ therein are full of doubts, with no certain knowledge, but only conjecture to follow. For a surety they killed him not, nay, Allah raised him up unto himself, and Allah is exalted in power, wise, and that's from the Surah 4:157. So that is their theory. They believe in Jesus, they believe Jesus lived, but they don't believe that he died and rose again, and that just there was somebody else there, and nobody realized that. So according to the Quran, it only appeared that Jesus was crucified, and Allah took him directly to heaven. The number of problems with this, number one is there's no evidence to back it up. Okay, they're just throwing out theories with no evidence whatsoever, contradicting the evidence in the eyewitness testimony. And the other one is the assertion comes from the Quran more than 600 years after the lifetime of Jesus. 600 years. I mean, it's hard to even imagine. This country is 250. I mean, it's way over double the life. Can you imagine in another 300? 350 years, somebody said, hey, George Washington wasn't the first president. Well, how do you know? Do you have any evidence? No, I don't have any evidence, but I just, it didn't happen, Despite all the evidence we have, it's just an absurd thing to say. And how can this be considered more authoritative than the source for the life of Jesus and the accounts of eyewitnesses? So we have eyewitnesses, multiple accounts written shortly after it happened, and then 600 years later you're going to say, oh, it never happened, and we have no evidence to back that up. And this theory contradicts all the eyewitness testimony and the testimony of the non-Christian sources. We mentioned that before. There's not just Christians' testimony, there's non-Christians who say the same thing. Moreover, this theory raises more questions than it answers. Are we to believe that there were scores of people who witnessed the crucifixion, some aspect of Jesus' death? There's the disciples, the Roman guards, Pilate, the Jews, Jesus' family and friends. They were all mistaken. You got family there. They can't tell you that's not Jesus. Nobody realizes about who was killed. How could so many people be wrong about simple identification? Unless he had an identical twin like my wife. That can get confusing, okay? But he did not have an identical twin. They're not even proposing that, but just some other random person was up there and everybody didn't realize it wasn't Jesus, but they're basing their whole thing on this strange theory. There are many other questions raised by this theory. If Jesus wasn't killed, then why was the tomb of the man who was killed found empty? Okay, so somebody died there. They put him in a tomb, and the tomb went empty. Some other guy was resurrected, some random person. Are we to believe the substitute rose from the dead? If so, how did he do it? Now you're in the same problem with all the other theories. How did he rise from the dead? Or did they steal his body, which we've proved is ridiculous? Are we to believe that all non-Christian historians are wrong about the death of Jesus? Even the Jews admit Jesus' death. Was the Talmud mistaken for saying Jesus was hanged on a tree on the eve of the Passover? In short, are we to believe that everyone from the first century was wrong about everything? So that's what you really have to believe, and somehow Islam, 600 years later, with no evidence, just gets it right and contradicts everything, and they're right. So really, it doesn't add up. One has to question a theory that comes 600 years after the events and asks you to believe that all the first century evidence is wrong. Like other alternative theories, this one is built on mere speculation without a shred of evidence to support it. Okay, so hopefully this strengthens your faith when we see there's only one possibility, that Jesus came and that he was God and that he died and he rose again. All the other theories that they try to make up just takes more faith to believe that than it does the truth. We don't have enough faith to believe it. The question is, do you have evidence for that? Christians are used to counterpunching. That's when somebody punches and you duck and you punch back. Alternative theories to the resurrection. We've been looking at a number of deficiencies in these theories, on the alternate theories themselves, but that's not enough. When the skeptics, they put the burden of proof, they rightly on the resurrection. So we claim he rose again, he resurrected, so we have the burden of proof, right? But if they come up with these alternate theories, what do they have to have? Burden of proof for their theories, okay? So if we say this is what we believe happened, this is all the evidence we have, you can't just make up throw out a theory there and just make it up with no evidence. Christians need to put the burden of proof on skeptics for their alternative theories. Okay, so they're just making up something. You don't have to, we've gone through them all. But a simple way is to say, what evidence do you have? In light of all the positive evidence for the resurrection, skeptics must offer positive first century evidence for their alternative views. Okay, and ask them. It's one thing to concoct an alternative theory to the resurrection. It's another thing to actually find first century evidence for it. A theory is not evidence. Just because somebody says some words and random thing, maybe this crazy thing is possible, you got to give me some evidence for that. A theory is not evidence. Anyone can concoct a theory to explain any historical event. Okay, you'll have some crazy theories about, going around, and I won't get into all of them, but give me some evidence, okay, for your theory. One example, if we were to claim all the video footage from the Holocaust concentration camps was staged and manufactured by Jews in order to garner sympathy and support for a Jewish state, would you believe that theory? Okay? Of course not. It flies in the face of all the known evidence. In order for that to be credible, independent eyewitness reports and other corroborating evidence to counter the numerous reports that say the Holocaust was real and actually carried out by the Nazis, but no such counter evidence exists. You can't just throw out a theory, you've got to have evidence, and a lot of evidence. I went to the library and they had like these grab bags for $2, history books, and I just grabbed one, and I love history, and they had a bunch of World War II, and there's a couple on the Holocaust, and one was from the commandant of Auschwitz, and they went through his life and the life of the guy who ended up catching him, and he was actually a Jew who had fled to England before it happened, and he joined in the army, and they used him, and he ended up catching this, I think it was Adolf Hess, and they ended up getting him to the Nuremberg. And what the Germans did, they kept records, but what did they do before they fled? They destroyed all their records, and they're at Nuremberg, and they're saying, oh, I wasn't me, or they downplayed everything, or I was just doing what I was told, and, everybody was passing the blame, and they got that guy in there, and he killed millions personally. I mean, it's just horrific what happened, and he admitted to everything. He basically said, this is what happened, these are the people that were there, and they watched it, and this is what he did, and it just blew the whole Nuremberg trials apart, and he's just admitting everything that happened. But if you're going to make a theory, you better have some evidence. It's the case with the resurrection. While skeptics have formulated numerous alternative theories to explain away the resurrection, there is no evidence from any first century source supporting any of them. The only alternative theory that's even mentioned in a first century source is that the disciples stole the body, and it's clearly identified as a lie. That's the only possible explanation they ever offered. This is a great tactic. I did that in my tactics book. If somebody comes up with a theory, the burden of proof is on them, right? And I like Charlie Kirk. He would say, everyone would come up, it's like, you're a racist. And what would he say? What did I ever say? The burden of proof is on them, and none of them can come up with anything because he wasn't. It's not, well, I have black friends, I know this, and I do this for them. You don't have to prove you're not. It's totally on them. So whenever you're debating anybody and somebody makes a wild theory, an accusation, I like somebody called him a fascist. He goes, what is a fascist? They're like, they can't even define the term. And he didn't even ask them, well, what have I done that's fascist? They're the ones that want to shut down free speech and opposing views. But anyway, that's just a great debate tactic. You made the claim, you back it up. Okay, I don't have to defeat your argument. You have the burden of proof. Where's your evidence? And there is no evidence. No one from the ancient, not even the enemies of Christianity, has offered a plausible alternative explanation for the resurrection. Okay? They want to say, I've heard historians say, oh, Jesus never even existed. The guy who was talking, like, that's not true. And then the guy backtracked real quick. But you got to, people will make up all sorts of stuff. Many alternative theories formulated over the past 200 years are rooted in anti-supernaturalism. So a lot of these theories are new that are coming out, and it's because, well, you won't believe in miracles. We believe in, science and evolution, and we've looked into that and gone through that, but that's the reason they'll just discount it. So modern scholars philosophically rule out miracles in advance. They concoct random explanations to explain away the resurrection. As we have seen, their random explanations contain multiple absurdities or improbabilities. Those who have alternate theories for the resurrection should be asked, what evidence do you have for your theory? Can you please name 3 or 4 first century sources that support your theory? Okay, you can't have somebody supporting it that's recent. You got what evidence do you have from the first century to support your theory? When honest skeptics are presented with that question, they'll have silence. They don't have an answer because no such evidence exists. You don't think there was enemies and people trying to discount Jesus' resurrection during the time? Of course there were. And as we said, the Jews believed that the body was stolen. That's the only theory they have from that. And we just made up a bunch of new ones, but okay, they have no evidence. It's not just the resurrection that the skeptics have to explain. They also have to explain the other 35 miracles that eyewitnesses have associated with Jesus. So not just the resurrection, he did a bunch of other miracles that many people saw. We are to believe the 4 gospel writers were all deceived in all those miracles as well as the resurrection. And like we said, this wasn't written hundreds of years later. This was written, okay, when people were still alive. They could verify. I cannot go claim I did all these miracles and I did it here in this place and all these people saw it and it didn't happen, and those people are still alive, okay? All right, and it didn't happen hundreds of years later, okay? So these first eyewitness accounts were while the people were still alive. The mass deception theory needs evidence. Do we have any first century sources that offer different explanation for the work of Jesus? The only one that they discovered, probably from the 2nd century, is the Jewish Talmud, and they admit that Jesus performed unusual acts by saying he practiced sorcery. So even the Jewish people that were against Christ, trying to downplay it, they had to admit, yeah, they did some amazing acts, but it was sorcery. Okay, this is a weak explanation. Just as one for the resurrection, the disciples stole the body. Perhaps sorcery could explain some of Jesus' miracles, but could they explain all 35? If you remember during Moses' time, they had sorcerers and they had some power. I don't know if it was magic or they turned the snakes, their staff into snakes, and I've heard it could be there was a way to hold a snake and it would be straight and then they would release it, or it was, power given by Satan, okay? But they were able to do some miracles, but it got to a point where what? They couldn't do it, right? The plagues, and they were just like, okay, that's the power of God. Sorcerers and magicians cannot perform the kinds of acts that Jesus is said to have performed, raising the dead, giving sight to the blind, walking on water, and so forth, okay? These are just highly visible that you can confirm, okay? It's not like, oh, I got back pain. Oh, he healed me of back pain, and who knows? Okay, so if there's no evidence for deception, are we to take the New Testament miracles at face value? Why not? We live in a theistic universe. We've shown that, where miracles are possible. It's like the box, okay? If something outside the box can reach inside the box and manipulate stuff, okay, it's not a closed box like atheists believe. It's where did the box come from? They have no explanation. Okay, if God can create the box, like a panorama, he can reach in and do what he wants. Well, it's true that we don't have independent attestation for all the miracles in the New Testament. Some are only mentioned in one book. There are many miracles that we have separate attestation for many of them, including the resurrection. They're mentioned in several books. That's why it's important. We think, well, I'm reading these, and these are kind of repeating themselves. Well, why? Because they're different people writing different views and different testimonies. I think Reader's Digest years ago tried to condense the Bible, to condense it. And they thought, well, these stories repeat themselves. And they tried and they couldn't do it. And each one has different perspectives and it's different views. It's showing us these are separate eyewitness accounts that were preserved, and they're there for a reason. The sheer number of Jesus' miracles cited by independent sources is too great to be explained away as a great deception. One person may be deceived once, but not numerous observers repeatedly. I always ask, these faith healers that we have. My dad used to say this. He goes, why don't they go into the cancer wards and the hospitals and just heal everybody for free? If they could really do that, why do we have to have this big show and you got to pay all this money and why can't they just walk into these hospitals, go around the country and cure all these cancer patients or whatever these incurable diseases? Why can't they do that? Okay, they can't. German scholar Wolfgang Trilling writes, we are convinced and hold it for historically certain that Jesus did in fact perform miracles. The miracle reports occupy so much space in the Gospels that it is impossible that all could have been subsequently invented or transferred to Jesus. Okay. William Lane Craig concludes, the fact that miracle working belongs to the historical Jesus is no longer disputed. That is, miracles are no longer disputed on historical grounds, only on philosophical grounds. Okay? The bottom line is there are too many miracles, too much testimony to believe that all the eyewitnesses got it wrong every time. With regard to the resurrection, all alternative theories have fatal flaws and we have strong eyewitness and circumstantial evidence that Jesus actually rose from the dead. So this is the important basis of Christianity. Is Jesus who he said he is? Did he perform miracles? Did he rise from the dead? And people want to undermine that. They want to try to destroy the credibility. But we really have great evidence. In other words, not only do we lack a natural explanation for the empty tomb, we have positive evidence for the resurrection. The explanation that requires the least amount of faith is that Jesus really did perform miracles and really did rise from the dead, as he predicted. So we don't have enough faith to believe that the New Testament writers were all deceived. And that's really the focus of this is it takes more faith to believe in atheism, evolution, that Jesus didn't rise from the dead than it does to believe that these things are true. Extraordinary claims and self-canceling evidence. Two more objections that skeptics often bring up against the resurrection and miracles. The first one is a demand for extraordinary evidence. Well, this is a great claim. I need extraordinary evidence. Some skeptics might admit that the resurrection is possible, but they would say it requires extraordinary evidence to believe it. That is, since the New Testament makes extraordinary claims, therefore I need extraordinary evidence, such as miracles, in order to believe those claims. This objection seems reasonable until we ask, what do you mean by extraordinary? If it means beyond the natural, then the skeptic is asking the resurrection to be confirmed by another miracle. So we'd have to have a second miracle to confirm the first. Then we'd need what? A third miracle to confirm the second. And it would just go on for infinity. And, we'd have to, I need to see a miracle today to prove that it happened 2,000 years ago. You just can't do that. So by this criteria, the skeptic would never believe in the resurrection, even if it really happened. There's something wrong with a standard of proof that makes it impossible for you to believe what actually occurred. Okay, and this is what sometimes they want. I want a standard so high that it's impossible, right? A lady, I mentioned this before, she was debating a street preacher. She's like, I won't believe until I see the medical records. And he's like, and she's like, that's convenient. They didn't keep medical records back then. She's like, well, that's convenient, and he goes, well, it's convenient you're asking for proof that doesn't exist. He goes, it's like saying, I won't believe until I see a Polaroid of the resurrected Jesus. Well, Polaroids didn't exist back then. So it's convenient that your level of proof you need is impossible and didn't exist at the time. So that's what a lot of people, it's amazing what they'll believe without evidence, but things they don't want to believe, we need evidence up here. If extraordinary means repeatable as in a laboratory, then no event from history can be believed because historical events cannot be repeated. You're saying I need to see it happen again? Well, nothing can be repeated in history. The believability of historical events can only be confirmed by looking at the quality of the eyewitness evidence and the nature of the forensic evidence. So we look at eyewitness, what's written about it. We look at historical evidence, and we can make an opinion on if it happened or not. Besides, atheists who demand repeatability for biblical miracles are inconsistent because they don't demand repeatability of the historical miracles in which they believe. Okay, so they want repeatability for the resurrection, but they believe things that aren't repeatable. What's a couple things that they believe that aren't repeatable? The Big Bang. Okay, I believe something came out of nothing, but it's God creating it, but they have no idea where it came from, where all the matter in the universe, it defies laws. It's a miracle. Whether you're an atheist or you believe in God, it's still miraculous. Okay, I mentioned I asked somebody, an atheist scientist, I asked him, and he did not have an answer. He could not even hazard a guess. He doesn't even really have a theory about it, but he knows it's not God for 100% certainty. It's not God. That's not even a possibility, but I can't give you a possibility. It just blows my mind. Like, you're not open to possibilities, but they believe in that spontaneous generation of life and macroevolution of subsequent life forms. They are not repeatable. Okay, I mentioned that they did an experiment. 1 times 10 to the power of 4,000 is a chance of life coming from non-life, which is just impossible, but they believe it. It's not repeatable. They have not been able to change anything from one species to another, and they have tried. They've used, I can't remember the type of fly. They used a fly, I can't remember which type, and they kept breeding them. They have very short lifespans, and they got all sorts of crazy mutations, but they ended up still with a fly, okay? They got weird things, which is what you're going to happen. There's going to be mutations, but they ended up, it's still at the end, they did not get a new species, even on purpose, with selective breeding. We've been selectively breeding animals for thousands of years, haven't we? Have we created anything except a cow or a dog? No. Okay, they've been doing that. They take the best cow, the best cattle, or they want certain traits in dogs and breeding them. Still dogs, still cats, still cows. We haven't gotten anything different, and we can't do that on purpose. We don't see evidence of that. It's not repeatable, but they still believe it. If the extraordinary means more than usual, then that's exactly what we have to support the resurrection. We have more eyewitness documents and earlier eyewitness documents for the resurrection than for anything else in the ancient world. Think about that. We mentioned how many, there's more manuscript documents than the top 10 historical things written, put together. And it just blows your mind. These documents include more historical details and figures that have been corroborated by more independent and external sources than anything else from the ancient world. Okay, so all the people we mentioned, they mentioned times and dates, and they've been proven, the leaders and Pontius Pilate and all these people they found evidence for them. We also have more than usual circumstantial evidence supporting the resurrection. Finally, the skeptic's presupposition can be challenged. We don't need extraordinary evidence to believe something. Atheists affirm from their own worldview they believe in the Big Bang, not because they have extraordinary evidence for it, but because there is good evidence that the universe exploded into being out of nothing, which is what we believe. We just believe God did it. Good evidence is all you need to believe something. However, atheists don't even have good evidence for some of their own beliefs. For example, atheists believe in spontaneous generation, macroevolution on faith alone. Okay, they can't repeat it. They've tried. They've done experiments and they've proven really that it's impossible, yet they have faith that it happened. We say faith alone because there's only little or no evidence for spontaneous generation and macroevolution. There's strong evidence against those possibilities. I mentioned Fred Hoyle, who was an atheist. He named the Big Bang. You know why he named it? As a derogatory term because he thought it proved God. Okay, he didn't like it. He believed in the universe was eternal, and they realized, hey, the universe is not eternal. It had a beginning, just like the Bible says. It came out of nothing, and just like the Bible says, and he didn't like that, so it was a derogatory term at first because he thought that supported the belief in God. But this is what the astronomer Fred Hoyle, he said, scientific discoveries had greatly shaken his faith in atheism. Do you get that? I'm glad he's honest there. What did he say? His faith in atheism. I mean, sometimes they'll openly admit it. He reflected on the energy needed to produce large quantities of carbon, and he wrote this. So he's a scientist. The more he's studying, the more he's understanding, he's an astrophysicist, I think, and how complex things are. This is what he said. Some super-calculating intellect must have designed the properties of the carbon atom. Otherwise, the chance of my finding such an atom through the blind forces of nature would be utterly minuscule. A super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as with chemistry and biology. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. This was an atheist. What is he saying? There is some intelligent being. This couldn't have happened by chance. I like how he said his faith in atheism shook it. He's being honest. It's a religion. It's a faith. They got to have faith to believe what they believe. And he's saying, I see things. It's so complex. I don't believe it can happen by itself. There must have been some intellect, super calculating intellect. Did he become a Christian? Absolutely not. I don't know what he believed exactly, but he went from an atheist to, I guess, a deist or some God there, some intelligent force that had to do it. So they believe things that are against evidence. Furthermore, skeptics don't demand extraordinary evidence for other extraordinary events from history. For example, few events from ancient history are more extraordinary than the accomplishments of Alexander the Great. I did ancient history for a couple years. I loved it. My favorite subject. I wrote papers on Alexander the Great and Roman. It's just amazing, fascinating. But he lived only 33 years. He achieved unparalleled success. If you've studied it, he conquered much of the civilized world. It was just amazing what he did. And in just a short time, I think he had the largest empire at the time. I know Genghis Khan had a larger empire, but just what he was able to accomplish from Greece, went to East India, south of Egypt. I mean, he's just defeating, conquering all these armies. It was amazing. Yet how do we know this about Alexander? You think there would be so much written about him, right? We'd have so much evidence. This guy conquered most of the civilized world, right? Okay, pretty important guy. You think all these cultures, everything would have stuff written about this guy. It says, we have no sources from his lifetime or soon after his death. We have only fragments of 2 works from about 100 years after his death. The truth is, we base virtually everything we know about the extraordinary life of Alexander the Great from historians who wrote 300 to 500 years after his death. That shocks me, because you go read a textbook, you go read an encyclopedia. When I was a kid, that's all we had. We had encyclopedias, and they don't say that. They just present it all as fact. It's written 300 to 500. The closest source is written 100 years after his death. And that's what we're going on, and we don't dispute any of it. We believe everything. And that little evidence, and we've shown how closely it was written after Jesus' death, how much has been preserved, how many eyewitnesses, and this is, amazing person that just one of the most important figures in history, conquered most of the known world, and we have that little evidence, and we just believe it all. In light of the robust evidence for the life of Christ, anyone who doubts Christ's accuracy should also doubt the accuracy of Alexander the Great. In fact, to be consistent, such a skeptic would have to doubt all of ancient history. Okay, there's probably a lot less written about a number of other people that did a lot less than Alexander the Great. Okay, and we accept it all, as true. Why do skeptics demand extraordinary evidence for the life of Christ, but not the life of Alexander the Great? Because they're hung up on what? A miracle. Despite the fact that miracles are possible because God exists, despite the fact that miracles were predicted and then witnessed, skeptics can't bear to admit that they actually occurred. And really, this gets into people don't want to admit there's a God and a Jesus. Now I'm accountable. If he really is rose again, then he's God, and now I'm accountable. And now, there's a lot of implications here that people just don't want to admit. And what they want to do is set the bar so high, and then their bar for believing things is down here, right? I've mentioned this before. I was debating somebody. I said that during COVID, I said, I think I got COVID already. Everybody knows natural immunity is better than the shot. I didn't think I was making a controversial statement. So the person I was talking to got upset. We got into a debate, and they're like, well, what evidence do you have? So I sent them all these studies that backed me up. And you know what they did? They said, well, they're not peer-reviewed. They tried picking them apart. They just come out. Peer-reviewed is where a bunch of people review it, and it doesn't mean the study is false. Okay, it just hasn't been confirmed by a bunch of other people. And then I'm thinking there, I'm like, well, what evidence do you have? If you want this peer-reviewed and I got to have all these studies, I go, what evidence do you have? You should hold yourself to the same standard. They sent me a video of somebody from the UN Health saying, there's multiple studies saying, and I'm like, that the vaccines are better than natural immunity. I'm like, well, that's not evidence. It's just somebody, give me a study. And they couldn't give me a study. And I'm like, you want my bar of peer-reviewed 20 studies and you can't give me one? And that's, so it's ask them, what's your evidence? You've got to show what evidence for your side. They set the bar for believability too high. It's as if some skeptics are saying, I won't believe in miracles because I haven't seen one. If the resurrection Jesus were to appear to me, then I would believe in him. Now that would be extraordinary evidence. certainly would be extraordinary, but is it really necessary? Does Jesus have to appear to everyone in the world to make his claims credible? Okay, can you imagine? That's the bar. Jesus has to appear, a 30-foot Jesus. I know a preacher used to joke about that. Is that what everybody needs to see before we believe? Why would he? We don't have to witness every event firsthand in order to believe the event actually occurred. It would be, in fact, physically impossible to do so. We believe the testimonies of others if they are trustworthy individuals, especially if their testimony is corroborated by other data. This is exactly the case with the testimony of the New Testament writers. And furthermore, if we have already mentioned, if God were too overt and did a bunch of miracle, then he might in some cases infringe on our free right. Okay, if God overwhelmingly just stood there and you better believe, and then we don't really have a free will. Okay, if the purpose of this life is to allow us to freely make choices that will prepare us for eternity, then God will give us convincing evidence, but not compelling evidence of his existence. And that's really what he's done. Therefore, those who want to follow God can do so with confidence, and those who do not can suppress or ignore the evidence and live as if he didn't exist. So God gives us a choice. He doesn't overwhelm our free will. The other problem is if he was constantly doing miracles, what's the problem with that? They wouldn't be miracles, really. If it was a common everyday event, they wouldn't be miraculous, supernatural. It would be just normal, wouldn't it? Okay, well, we all had visions of Jesus. Okay, we're all having these visions. It just becomes normal. It doesn't really become a miracle. I'm going to leave it there. But just some thoughts. The evidence is for that Jesus existed. We have overwhelming biblical evidence. We have eyewitness testimony. We have non-Christians that verify everything that the Bible says. And really, these theories, if they have come up with a theory, what are you supposed to do? Ask for the evidence. What evidence do you have? Where'd you get that from? What first century source do you have that backs up that evidence? Okay, was there somebody? And they don't, okay? And they won't. And really, we're led to believe that Jesus did. He came and died, and he rose again. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we love you. We thank you for your goodness. Thank you for all that you've done. Thank you for coming to earth and living here and suffering, dear Lord, for our sins and dying on the cross for us. Thank you for that. We love you in Jesus' name. Amen.